The night bus hissed to a stop under a flickering street lamp, rain stitching silver lines across the pavement. Amelia tightened her scarf and stepped down carefully, already bracing herself for another long night that paid too little and asked for too much. People often said caregiving was noble work. They rarely said it was lonely. She walked the last 2 streets to the narrow terraced house, counting her steps like a ritual, trying not to think about the overdue electricity bill folded inside her bag. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender and old books. A single lamp glowed in the sitting room, casting soft shadows over framed photographs of a life that once moved faster than this one ever would again. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore sat by the window, hands folded, eyes fixed on the dark garden as if it might speak back to her. "I'm here, Mrs. Whitmore," Amelia said gently, setting her bag down. She always said it the same way, calm and warm, even on nights when exhaustion pressed behind her eyes. Eleanor turned slowly, her face softening. "I was afraid I'd imagined you," she said. Her voice trembled, thin but precise, like china. Amelia smiled and knelt to help her out of the chair. "Not tonight. Let's get you comfortable." She moved with practiced patience, lifting, adjusting, supporting, never rushing, never sighing, even when her arms ached. She listened as Eleanor spoke in fragments about the past, train journeys, summer picnics, a husband whose laugh once filled every room. Amelia responded to every story as if it were brand new, because to Eleanor, it always was. Later, as Amelia spooned warm soup to Eleanor's lips, the older woman studied her carefully. "You have kind hands," she said. "They don't belong to someone who's had an easy life." Amelia paused, then smiled again. "I suppose they've learned along the way." The television murmured quietly in the background, a news channel flashing images of glass towers and sharp-suited men discussing mergers and markets. Amelia barely glanced at it as she wiped Eleanor's mouth and adjusted her blanket. The world on the screen felt distant, unreal. When Eleanor finally drifted to sleep, Amelia sat beside her, sorting medications, writing careful notes for the morning nurse. She noticed a photograph on the side table she hadn't seen before, a much younger Eleanor standing beside a tall man in an expensive suit, his arm around her shoulders, his smile confident, almost guarded. "Your son," Amelia whispered to the sleeping room. Eleanor stirred but didn't wake. Amelia leaned back, unaware that the man in the photograph now dominated headlines, boardrooms, and billion-pound deals, and that, across the city, he was staring at a security report, frowning at a single unfamiliar name listed under primary nighttime caregiver. He had no idea who Amelia was. Not yet. And Amelia had no idea that the quiet patience she poured into this small, fading life was already setting unseen forces into motion, forces that would soon test loyalty, money, and the true cost of kindness. The following evening arrived colder, the sort of cold that crept into bones and stayed there. Amelia was already at the kitchen sink, washing a chipped mug, when she heard the front door open more carefully than usual. Footsteps, measured, unfamiliar, paused in the hallway. She turned, heart tightening. Visitors were rare. No one ever came this late. A tall man stood there, coat still buttoned, eyes scanning the room with the alertness of someone used to controlling spaces. He looked out of place among the crocheted cushions and faded wallpaper, like a skyscraper dropped into a quiet village. "I'm looking for Eleanor Whitmore," he said. Amelia wiped her hands on a towel, instinctively stepping forward as if to shield the sitting room behind her. "She's resting. May I ask who you are?" The man hesitated, something unreadable crossing his face. "Her son." Amelia nodded slowly. "She's asleep." Today was tiring for her. He seemed surprised by the firmness in her tone. "I'll be quiet." He moved past her before she could respond, his gaze already fixed on the armchair by the window, on the soft rise and fall of the blanket over Eleanor's chest. He stood there longer than expected, shoulders stiff, as if unsure what to do with his own hands. "She looks smaller," he murmured. Amelia stayed near the doorway. "She's comfortable. That's what matters most now." He turned to look at her properly for the first time. Noticed the worn shoes, the careful posture, the tired steadiness in her eyes. "You're the night caregiver?" "Yes." "How long?" 6 months. His brow furrowed. "She never mentioned you." Amelia smiled faintly. She doesn't remember names very well anymore. But she remembers how she feels. That seemed to unsettle him more than anything else. He pulled out his phone, glanced at it, then slid it back into his pocket without answering whatever waited there.
"I'm Daniel," he said at last.
"I don't come often."
Amelia didn't comment.
She returned to the kitchen, leaving him standing there with the silence. A moment later, he followed, watching as she reheated soup with the same quiet care she did every night.
"You live nearby?" he asked.
"An hour away by bus." "For this job?" "Yes." He leaned against the counter, eyes narrowing slightly. "It's not exactly well paid."
"No. Then why?"
Amelia stirred the soup, steam fogging her glasses. "Because she shouldn't be alone at night."
Daniel looked back toward the sitting room, jaw tightening. "She isn't alone. She has staff."
"She has people," Amelia corrected gently. "Not always presents."
He said nothing.
Over the next hour, Amelia went about her routine as she always did. Daniel stayed, silent, watching. He saw the way Amelia adjusted Eleanor's pillow without waking her, how she spoke softly even when Eleanor didn't respond, how she explained each movement as if respect itself might keep confusion at bay. At one point, Eleanor opened her eyes and smiled faintly. "You came back," she whispered to Amelia.
"I told you I would."
Her gaze drifted past Amelia, landing on Daniel. For a brief second, recognition flickered. "Oh," she said softly. "You're busy, dear. You shouldn't worry."
Daniel swallowed hard.
"I'm here, Mum." Eleanor's fingers tightened weakly around Amelia's hand. "She's very good," she said. "Don't let her go." The words landed between them like a quiet verdict. Later, when Eleanor slept again, Daniel stood by the window, city lights reflecting in the glass. "You know who I am," he said, not looking at her.
Amelia shrugged lightly.
"You're her son." "That's not what I meant."
She met his gaze steadily.
"What you do for work doesn't change what she needs." He studied her as if she were a problem he couldn't quite solve. "Most people treat me differently once they know."
"Then it's good I didn't," Amelia replied.
Something shifted then, subtle but unmistakable. He nodded once, slowly. The nights after that, Daniel came more often.
Sometimes he stayed an hour.
Sometimes he left quickly, as if guilt had an expiration date. Amelia never commented.
She simply did her work.
One evening, as they folded laundry together in silence, Daniel spoke.
"She used to read to me when I couldn't sleep. Did she ever tell you that?"
"She reads to herself now," Amelia said.
Out loud.
The same paragraph, over and over. Daniel smiled faintly.
"She always did that,"
said the words felt safer when spoken.
Another pause.
Then, quieter. "I didn't realize how much she was fading."
Amelia folded a cardigan carefully.
"People don't fade all at once.
It's slower than that.
You only notice when you stop looking away." Daniel exhaled, long and heavy.
Weeks passed. Winter deepened.
Eleanor grew weaker, her good days fewer, her nights longer.
Amelia's hands learned new gentlenesses.
Daniel's visits grew less confident, more human. One night, as Amelia helped Eleanor breathe through a spell of confusion, Daniel stood helplessly by, eyes shining. Amelia guided him without words, where to stand, how to hold his mother's hand, when to speak and when not to. Afterward, in the quiet kitchen, Daniel said, "I've built companies. I've led thousands of people. I've never felt so useless."
Amelia rinsed a cup.
"Love doesn't come with instructions." He nodded slowly, absorbing that. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware of the small room where time was thinning, where care mattered more than money ever could. And Amelia, still struggling, still counting bus stops and coins, remained exactly where she was, unaware that the choices Daniel was beginning to make would soon stretch far beyond this house, far beyond either of them, changing lives in ways neither had yet imagined. The following morning arrived quietly, pale light filtering through the thin curtains. Amelia had barely slept, resting in the chair beside Eleanor's bed, waking at every small sound. Eleanor's breathing had steadied near dawn, but something about it felt different, shallower, as if each breath were carefully chosen. Daniel returned earlier than usual, his coat still damp from mist. He paused when he saw Amelia, eyes flicking to the untouched tea on the table. "Did she?" he began, unable to finish. "She's resting," Amelia said softly. "But she's tired today." Daniel nodded, running a hand through his hair. He looked older in the morning light, the sharp edges dulled by worry. He sat beside his mother, taking her hand with a hesitancy that hadn't been there weeks ago.
Eleanor's eyes opened briefly.
"You're here again," she whispered, almost surprised.
"I am,"
Daniel said, voice unsteady. "I'm not going anywhere." She smiled faintly, then turned her head slightly toward Amelia. "You should eat," she said. "You work too hard."
Amelia swallowed.
"I will, Mrs. Whitmore." Eleanor's fingers tightened weakly around Daniel's.
"She listens," she murmured.
"That's rare." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, as if committing the words to memory. As the day unfolded, Amelia noticed small changes Daniel might have missed. The way Eleanor's hands trembled more, how her gaze lingered on the ceiling as if she were reading something written there. Amelia adjusted pillows, moistened lips, whispered reassurances that felt as much for herself as for Eleanor. By afternoon, a nurse arrived briefly, speaking in careful tones.
Daniel stood rigidly, absorbing medical phrases that sounded too final.
Amelia caught his eye once, just long enough to steady him. When the nurse left, the house felt emptier than before. Daniel paced the sitting room, phone buzzing endlessly in his pocket. Finally, he silenced it and turned to Amelia.
"I've cancelled everything," he said.
"Meetings, flights, all of it."
Amelia nodded. "She'll feel that."
"I should have done this sooner," he said quietly.
Amelia didn't answer.
Regret, she had learned, was a fragile thing.
It broke easily under too much handling.
That evening, Eleanor became restless, her words slipping out of order. She called Amelia by her own sister's name, then apologized. Amelia corrected her gently, again and again, until names no longer mattered.
Daniel watched, helpless.
"How do you know what to say?" he asked under his breath. "I don't," Amelia replied. "I just stay." Later, when Eleanor finally slept, Daniel sank into the chair opposite Amelia. The house hummed softly, pipes ticking, a distant siren wailing somewhere beyond the street. "You could be doing something else with your life," he said suddenly. "Something easier."
Amelia smiled faintly.
"Easy doesn't always mean better." He studied her, the question forming before he could stop it. "What do you want?" The answer surprised her with how quickly it came. "Stability," she said. "Enough to breathe without counting every pound." Daniel nodded slowly, the words settling somewhere deep.
The days blurred together after that.
Eleanor's world shrank to moments, warm hands, familiar voices, the sound of Amelia reading softly from an old book Eleanor no longer followed but still seemed to enjoy. Daniel stayed close, sleeping on the sofa, learning the rhythms of care by watching Amelia. One night, Eleanor woke suddenly, eyes clear in a way that startled them both. She looked from Amelia to Daniel, studying their faces as if memorizing them. "You found her," Eleanor said to Daniel.
He leaned forward. "I did."
"She's good," Eleanor whispered. "Don't let kindness be the thing you forget."
Daniel's throat tightened. "I won't."
Eleanor's gaze softened, drifting back to Amelia.
"You'll be all right," she said gently.
Amelia felt something crack inside her. "So will you." Eleanor smiled, a small, peaceful curve of the lips, and closed her eyes again. Afterward, Daniel stood alone by the window, city lights blurred by rain.
"She trusts you more than anyone," he said quietly. Amelia shook her head.
"She trusts consistency."
"That too," he said.
Then, after a pause, "When this is over, I'd like to help you." Amelia stiffened slightly. "I don't need charity."
"I know," Daniel replied.
"That's why I didn't say charity." She looked at him then, really looked, saw the man beneath the title, the wealth, the armor.
"We'll talk later," she said.
Outside, winter pressed on, indifferent and cold. Inside, time continued its slow, irreversible work. Amelia stayed beside Eleanor, as she always had, her presence steady, her care unmeasured. Daniel watched, learning in fragments what no boardroom ever taught him. And somewhere between whispered stories, shared silences, and nights that refused to end, something irrevocable was taking shape. An understanding, a promise, a turning point that had not yet revealed its full cost, nor its full reward. The house seemed to breathe differently after that night, as if it too understood what was approaching. Amelia noticed it in the way shadows lingered longer in the corners, in how even the clock's ticking sounded cautious. Eleanor slept more now, drifting in and out, her dreams pulling her further from the room with each hour. Daniel stayed close
closer than he ever had before. He learned where the spare blankets were kept, how Eleanor liked her tea even though she could no longer drink it, which floorboard creaked loudest and needed avoiding. He followed Amelia's lead without pride, without questions that demanded answers. One afternoon, while Amelia helped Eleanor wash, Daniel stood in the doorway, unsure whether to stay or go. "You can sit with her," Amelia said quietly. "She knows you're here, even when she doesn't open her eyes." He stepped forward and took Eleanor's hand. "I'm here, Mum," he whispered. Her lips moved, barely audible. Amelia leaned closer. "What is it?" "Home," Eleanor murmured. Daniel's eyes filled. "You are home," he said, voice breaking. Amelia finished carefully, covering Eleanor with warm towels, preserving her dignity the way she always did. When they were alone again, Daniel let out a breath he'd been holding for years. "I thought success would make things simpler," he said. "That if I worked hard enough, I'd earn the right to slow down." Amelia rinsed her hands. "Life doesn't wait for permission." He nodded, rubbing his face. "She used to tell me that. I never listened." That evening, Daniel ordered food for them both, something Amelia would never have done herself. She protested weakly, then relented when she saw the insistence in his eyes. They ate quietly at the small kitchen table, the hum of the fridge filling the silence. "You don't talk much about yourself," Daniel said. "There's not much to tell," Amelia replied. "I doubt that." She considered him for a moment. "I had plans once. Training, qualifications. Then my mother got ill. Someone had to stay. And now? She's gone. The plans never came back." Daniel absorbed that, his jaw tightening. "You shouldn't have to lose your life because you chose to care for someone else." Amelia smiled faintly. "Caregiving teaches you that life doesn't come in neat balances." The next few days were quieter still. Eleanor's words faded into murmurs, then into soft breaths. Amelia spoke for both of them now, narrating small things, the weather, the sound of birds, memories Eleanor no longer corrected. Daniel sat through it all, learning patience the hard way. One night, near dawn, Eleanor stirred suddenly, eyes opening wide. She looked directly at Daniel, clarity flashing like a match struck in darkness. "Promise me," she said. "Anything," Daniel replied instantly. "Don't become hard," she whispered. "Money makes it easy." Daniel pressed his forehead to her hand. "I promise." Her gaze shifted to Amelia. "You kept me company," she said. "That matters more than you know." Amelia's voice trembled despite her effort. "It was an honor." Eleanor's eyes closed again, the moment passing as quickly as it had arrived. When morning came, the nurse returned, speaking softly, checking vitals with a solemn expression that needed no translation. Daniel stood rigid, while Amelia held Eleanor's hand, counting breaths, offering comfort without words. After the nurse left, Daniel sank into a chair, staring at nothing. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "You already are," Amelia replied. "You're here." He looked up at her, eyes searching. "Will you stay?" When it happens." Amelia nodded without hesitation. "Of course." Time stretched thin that day. Each minute felt borrowed. Daniel received calls he didn't answer, messages he didn't read. The world beyond the house might as well have vanished. As evening settled, Eleanor's breathing slowed further, pauses growing longer between each rise of her chest. Amelia adjusted the lamp, dimming it, creating a softness that felt respectful, almost sacred. Daniel sat on one side of the bed, Amelia on the other. "I'm scared," he admitted quietly. "So is she," Amelia said. "That's why we stay calm." He watched her, truly watched her, as if understanding for the first time what strength looked like without applause. Hours passed like that, suspended. Then Eleanor shifted, a small sound escaping her lips. Amelia leaned in immediately. "I'm here," she whispered. Eleanor's fingers twitched once, then relaxed. Daniel held his breath. Amelia stayed still, counting silently, waiting, her hand warm around Eleanor's. The room seemed to pause with them, every sound fading into the background. And in that fragile stillness, with the night pressing gently against the windows, everything that mattered narrowed down to presence, to love, to the quiet courage of not turning away, while outside, unseen and unknowing, the rest of the world continued on its ordinary path, unaware of the moment it was about to lose, and the changes that moment would soon demand. The silence stretched,
delicate and irreversible. Amelia felt it first, the subtle shift that no monitor could capture. She leaned closer, her ear near Eleanor's lips, her fingers resting lightly at her wrist. There was no hurry in her movements, only certainty. "She's gone," Amelia said softly. Daniel's breath shuddered out of him, sharp and broken. He didn't cry at first. He simply bowed his head, pressing Eleanor's hand to his forehead, as if warmth alone could argue with truth. Amelia stayed where she was, her other hand still resting on Eleanor's arm, grounding the moment so it didn't fracture into something unbearable. They sat like that for a long time. When Daniel finally stood, his legs unsteady, Amelia gently closed Eleanor's eyes, smoothing her hair, restoring dignity even in absence. She whispered a goodbye meant only for herself, a caregiver's farewell that carried no expectation of being heard. Outside, night loosened its grip, the first pale hint of morning slipping into the room. Life, relentless and indifferent, continued. Later, when arrangements were made and the house felt suddenly too large, Daniel stood in the doorway of the sitting room, staring at the empty chair by the window. "She waited for me," he said quietly. "I don't deserve that." Amelia shook her head. "Love isn't about deserving. It's about showing up when it counts." He turned to her then, eyes red, voice steadying. "You gave her peace." "So did you," Amelia replied. The days that followed passed in a blur of quiet decisions and heavy moments. The funeral was small, dignified. Daniel stood apart from the suits and polished condolences, his attention fixed on Amelia as if she were the only solid thing in the room. She wore a simple black coat, hands folded, her presence unobtrusive, exactly as Eleanor would have wanted. Afterward, when the house emptied and silence returned, Daniel asked Amelia to stay for tea. It felt strange to sit there without Eleanor, the absence louder than any sound. "I've been thinking," Daniel said slowly. "About what she said. About not becoming hard." Amelia listened. "I built my life chasing numbers," he continued. "Margins. Growth. Efficiency. I told myself I was doing it for security, for family. Somewhere along the way, it stopped being about people at all." He looked at her, something resolute forming behind his grief. "I don't want to go back to that." Amelia met his gaze, calm and unflinching. "Then don't." He smiled faintly. "I'm serious. I want to change how I do things. Starting with you." She stiffened slightly. "Daniel." "Not charity," he said quickly. "Choice. Opportunity. You said you wanted stability. I can't undo what life took from you, but I can stop pretending that people like you should struggle quietly while others profit loudly." He slid a folder across the table. Amelia didn't open it. "I'm launching a foundation," he said. "For caregivers. Real wages. Training. Support. I want you involved, not as a symbol, but as a voice." Amelia stared at the folder, then at him. "You don't even know if I'd be good at that." Daniel smiled, a genuine one this time. "I've watched you. I've never been more certain of anything." She exhaled slowly, years of careful restraint pressing against the moment. "I'll think about it." Weeks later, Amelia stood at a bus stop she no longer needed. The house behind her was empty now, its chapter closed. Daniel had insisted on driving her, but she'd declined. Some rituals mattered. She didn't count steps anymore. She didn't count coins. In the months that followed, Amelia found herself in rooms she'd never imagined entering. Quiet boardrooms, community halls, training centers filled with people who looked like her once did, tired, capable, unseen. She spoke softly, without flourish, and people listened. Daniel kept his promise. He didn't step in front. He didn't polish her story. He let it stand as it was, human, imperfect, powerful. One evening, long after the foundation had begun to change lives, Amelia returned to the old house one last time. It was being sold. She stood by the window where Eleanor once sat, watching the street lights flicker on. "You mattered," she whispered into the empty room. And somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the city, beyond balance sheets and profit margins, that truth echoed, proof that quiet care could ripple outward, reshaping lives, softening power, and turning presence into legacy. Not through money alone, but through kindness that stayed.